bottom line, his work ethic
Eddie
sucked.
Van Halen,
Okay?
a
Now,
revolutionary
if he wanted
guitarist,
to see in this
was known
band
for his low
and be a team
tolerance for
player, he would be here
mediocrity,
right now.
ego, or phoniness in the music world. He didn't hold back when it came to legendary singers, fellow guitarists, or even MTV. The stories behind his grudges are as wild as his solos. Few rock partnerships flamed as brilliantly and burned as bitterly as that between Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth. Together, they forged one of the most electrifying bands of the late 70s and 80s, blending Eddie's revolutionary guitar wizardry with Roth's flamboyant frontman persona. However, behind the pyrotechnics and platinum records was a relationship built on constant friction, ego clashes, and diverging creative visions. Over time, their mutual disdain evolved into one of the most toxic feuds in rock history. Roth once summed up their relationship in a single venomous sentence: "We were crosstown adversaries, and we hated each other with a vengeance." That quote wasn't hyperbole, it was a raw truth. From their earliest days, the seeds of conflict were sown. Eddie, the quiet genius obsessed with tone, harmony, and pushing the boundaries of music, stood in stark contrast to Roth, the flamboyant showman who saw image, charisma, and entertainment as equally vital to the band's identity. Their priorities rarely aligned. Where Roth saw Van Halen as a rock and roll circus wild, sexy, Loudie saw it as a platform for experimentation and instrumental mastery. This tension simmered for years, but it boiled over dramatically during the recording of their 1984 album, particularly with the now iconic track Jump. While Jump would become the band's biggest hit, it represented everything Roth hated. It was driven by keyboards, not guitar, and it marked a significant departure from the band's hard rock roots. To Roth, it was a betrayal of Van Halen's essence, and he didn't hide his contempt for the song. Roth believed that fans wanted Eddie the guitar god, not Eddie the keyboardist. He pleaded with Eddie not to pursue the track, calling it soft, commercial, and inauthentic. But Eddie had no patience for that kind of gatekeeping. His now legendary response summed up his rebellious spirit: "If I want to play a tuba or a Bavarian cheese whistle, I will." He wasn't just being sarcastic. He was making it clear that no one, not even Roth, was going to dictate how he expressed his artistry. That wasn't just a one-time spat. It was emblematic of their entire dynamic. Eddie felt stifled by Roth's controlling tendencies, while Roth saw Eddie's drive to innovate as pretentious and misguided. It was only a matter of time before their disagreements spiraled into open hostility. Their first major split came in 1985 after the success of 1984. Roth left the band, claiming he wanted to pursue solo projects, but the underlying truth was that he and Eddie could no longer coexist. For a while, it seemed like they were done with each other for good, but the drama was far from over. In 1996, fans were stunned when Roth rejoined Van Halen briefly for a reunion at the MTV Video Music Awards. But what was billed as a triumphant return quickly turned into another public disaster. The tension backstage was so severe that it allegedly escalated into threats of physical violence. Roth, hoping to rejoin the band full-time, was blindsided when it was revealed that Van Halen had already chosen Gary Cherone as their next frontman. Furious, Roth felt used and humiliated. According to accounts from the time, the two nearly came to blows, yet again proving that any reconciliation was purely surface level. Eddie didn't mince words when later reflecting on Roth's personality. "He does not want to be my friend," he stated bluntly. Roth's perception of himself is different than who he is in reality. It was a brutal character assessment that mirrored years of resentment and frustration. To Eddie, Roth was narcissistic, insincere, and incapable of genuine collaboration. To Roth, Eddie was rigid, unsympathetic, and dismissive of the frontman's role in their shared legacy. Even during their brief reunion tours in the 2000s, the animosity never truly disappeared. Interviews and behind-the-scenes footage often showed them keeping their distance, barely tolerating one another's presence. They would stand on the same stage night after night, but there was no camaraderie. Only the shared weight of the band's legacy and the unspoken acknowledgement that they needed each other, at least commercially. What makes their feud so fascinating and tragic is that together, Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth created magic. Their chemistry, however volatile, was unmatched, but that same chemistry proved impossible to sustain. In the end, their rivalry wasn't just about keyboards or egos. It was about two men with fundamentally different visions of what music, fame, and artistry should look like. When Eddie passed away in 2020, Roth paid tribute in a characteristically cryptic tweet. "What a long, great trip it's been." There was no emotional outpouring, no reconciliatory tone, just an acknowledgement that their journey together, however legendary, was also deeply troubled. It was a fitting epitaph to one of rock's most combustible partnerships. While Eddie Van Halen and Sammy Hagar produced some of Van Halen's most commercially successful and musically mature work during their time together, the relationship between the two was far from smooth. Beneath the chart-topping albums and sold-out tours was a volatile undercurrent of ego clashes, mistrust, and creative rivalry. Although the pair eventually reconciled shortly before Eddie's death in 2020, their history was marred by years of tension, miscommunication, and personal betrayal. After David Lee Roth's dramatic departure in 1985, Eddie sought not just a replacement frontman, but someone who could match his creative ambition without the circus-like persona Roth brought. Sammy Hagar, fresh from a successful solo career, seemed like the perfect fit. Their early chemistry was undeniable. Albums like 5150, OU812, and 4 Unlawful Carnal Knowledge showcased a more melodic, sophisticated Van Halen, with Hagar's powerhouse vocals complementing Eddie's technical brilliance. But by the time they reached the 1995 Balance sessions, the relationship had begun to unravel. According to Hagar, the recording process became emotionally exhausting and creatively suffocating. In a candid interview with Howard Stern, Hagar recalled how Eddie would argue every point, no matter how small. "Black versus white," Hagar said, describing Eddie's compulsive need to push back on even the most trivial of decisions. It wasn't about the music anymore. It was about control. At the heart of the feud was a growing sense of insecurity and jealousy. Eddie, by many accounts, had begun to resent Hagar's increasing independence. Sammy's close friendship with bassist Michael Anthony was a particular sore spot. Eddie allegedly saw the bond as a threat, interpreting their alliance as an attempt to box him out of the band's power structure. As tensions rose, Eddie's attitude toward Anthony would sour dramatically, eventually leading to Anthony's marginalization. Within the band, then came Cabo Wabo, both a song and a brand that would become a lightning rod for deeper resentment. Hagar founded the Cabo Wabo Cantina and later launched a highly successful tequila brand under the same name. Eddie, rather than celebrating his bandmates' entrepreneurial success, reportedly viewed these side ventures as betrayal, a signal that Hagar wasn't fully committed to Van Halen. The success of Cabo Wabo outside of the band's ecosystem fed Eddie's paranoia that Hagar was building something that didn't include him. The sense of alienation and mistrust only deepened when the band briefly reunited for the 2004 Van Halen reunion tour. What should have been a celebration turned into a nightmare for Hagar. In interviews after the tour, Hagar painted a grim picture of Eddie's mental and emotional state. He treated people so badly, Hagar said. He was a complete raving maniac. According to Hagar, Eddie's erratic behavior made the tour miserable for everyone involved. He described scenes of chaos, backstage, emotional blopes, and a version of Eddie that was far removed from the creative genius he once admired. The tension came to a head during performances. Fans noticed that Eddie's playing was inconsistent, and his appearance disheveled, distracted, and unhealthy became a topic of concern. Hagar later claimed Eddie was in no condition to tour, and had refused to take care of himself, physically or mentally. Their onstage chemistry deteriorated. Even when they shared a mic, it was clear the brotherhood they once claimed was now little more than a professional obligation. In the aftermath of the tour, Hagar and Eddie went years without speaking. Both men lashed out in the press, offering contradictory stories about who was at fault. Hagar insisted he was pushed out of the band unfairly, while Eddie accused Hagar of being selfish and uncooperative. Their once promising partnership had descended into bitter estrangement, but time, as it often does, softened some of those wounds. In the final years of Eddie's life, as his health declined, the two reportedly began exchanging messages again. Hagar has since revealed that their reconciliation, though private, meant the world to him. In a 2020 interview following Eddie's death, Hagar said, "We had love at the end. We had closure. It wasn't a full-scale reunion, but it was enough to give both men some peace." Despite that late-stage healing, Hagar has remained honest about the toll the relationship took on him. His memories of Eddie are mixed: awe at his genius, frustration at his volatility, and sadness at what could have been, in many ways. Their story reflects the classic rock tragedy, two powerful creative forces who brought out the best and worst in each other. Two powerful creative forces who brought out the best and worst in each other. Their records together still stand as some of Van Halen's strongest. Why Can't This Be Love, Right Now, Dreams, and countless others are enduring testaments to what they could create when they were in sync. But behind the music was a complicated human story, one filled with ego battles, bruised feelings, and a friendship that could never quite withstand the weight of their ambitions. In the pantheon of rock guitar gods, Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads stood as two titanic forces, reshaping the sound of the late 1970s and early 80s. Both revolutionized the instrument in their own ways. Eddie with his blistering two-handed tapping and melodic speed, Randy with his neoclassical influence and surgical precision, while fans admired both guitarists and debated who was truly the best behind the scenes. The tension between them was real, intense, and at times volatile. Though they were rarely in the same room, Eddie and Randy's careers often ran parallel. Van Halen exploded with their debut in 1978, establishing Eddie as a guitar innovator seemingly from another planet. His improvisational style, wild stage, energy, and technical mastery were unlike anything mainstream audiences had heard. Just a few years later, Randy Rhoads, fresh from Quiet Riot, joined Ozzy Osbourne's solo band and stunned the world with his blend of classical composition and heavy metal precision on Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. Their guitar philosophies couldn't have been more different. Eddie was instinctive, raw, and self-taught, relying heavily on feel and experimentation. Randy, on the other hand, was a disciplined student of music theory who blended classical guitar, scales into rock riffs, yet their brilliance often drew comparisons, and Eddie didn't take that well. By many accounts,